Well, hello everybody. I am happy to be joining you here on our live stream today. We are going to be answering some questions that have been popping up in my online communities. And really there's a big question that keeps popping up, which I'm going to address a little bit more in depth today. I've talked about it a lot in various forms, but today we're going to go a little bit more in depth in terms of consciousness raising. So I'm going to call this segment today 3 Steps to Create a Truly Conscious Relationship. So today what I really want to talk about is this question: is it healthy to stay in a relationship when one person is conscious of their attachment style and the other person is not? What if one person wants to grow and the other person feels like there's nothing wrong and they don't want anything to change? Okay, so there's really sort of 3 parts to this, and we're going to break it down a little bit. And the first part is we need to define consciousness and unconsciousness. Okay. Secondly, we need to address this notion that love has to be equated with need satisfaction. And thirdly, we have to kind of reframe the question in a more positive way. So if we are defining consciousness as the ability to assume, let's call it an observer position in the internal world as much as the external world, then we are essentially defining consciousness as a measure of free will. And that is the ability to choose how you are going to respond to something. Therefore, unconsciousness would actually be a form of being lacking in free will. And so if you want to learn more about what I have to say about these things, make sure you stick around for this segment. If you don't know me or you're just joining me here for the first time, my name is Brianna McWilliam. I'm an author, educator, and licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist. I've been in the field for about 13 years now, and I am wild about helping individuals who are struggling with insecure attachment styles go from feeling fearful or confused in their relationships to stepping into what I call their self-sovereignty and calling in those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships they want. And ideally doing it without having to talk for circles for hours or even years on end in therapy with no tangible result. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to applying creative arts interventions in the framework of attachment theory. And the method that I use, I call the MAC method, and that is mastery, awareness, and creativity. And it's a continuous feedback loop through 3 things, and that is cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experientials. And so as we continue to talk about this topic today, we are going to be hanging out in the realms of cognitive reframing. So I want to go back to what I was saying about the differences between consciousness and unconsciousness. So if we are defining consciousness as an ability to exercise your free will, to choose how you respond to something, then unconsciousness would be a lack of that free will, which is to say we don't feel as if we are choosing our responses, that we are responding compulsively, right, or impulsively, that there is something within us that acts on our behalf, but it's always kind of rolling like 3 steps before we can catch up to it. Now, becoming conscious does not then mean that you learn how to control your feelings so much as you learn how to be in relationship to your feelings so that you can allow for them rather than just be kind of pushed around by them. And so feelings, if we could compare them to water, okay? If you could imagine that your feelings are like water, it's not going to behoove you in a storm to try to wall up the dam, but rather to open the channel just wide enough so that you can let the water through so that it doesn't flood the surrounding lands, right? And so it's really futile to try to control the storm, but it would be a benefit to you to try to build a strong channel, okay? And that is what I just mentioned the MAC method helps you do. So your feelings, they really contain vital information for the expansion of your consciousness. And so your feelings will let you know how in alignment you are with the most active parts of yourself at any given time. And so if the goal of consciousness is not to assume a revised or a more enlightened or insightful identity so much as it is to improve your relationship to these multiple parts of you that may be stimulated at any given time in a variety of contexts. So to really get to this, you have to understand that you are not a singularity, okay? You are actually a bunch of moving parts kind of held together and constellated around this sort of invisible energetic glue. Some might call it your soul, other might call it your biofield, other might say it's your life force energy, okay? And this is, if I could put a picture to it, I might tell you to think of it like a snow globe. And so to be in a conscious relationship is to hold this kind of loving position regardless of where your partner may be in their process. So let's say, for the purposes of this discussion, we will equate consciousness with being increasingly secure. So secure attachment is what I'm saying. I refer to individuals who have secure attachment as cornerstones. So you might think, I love you because I am love. And nothing you could do or say will detract from what I find valuable and lovable about you, or what I find valuable and lovable about me. Now, if we are to say, I cannot grow unless my partner grows, and continuing to love them is unhealthy and it's holding me back, then you're actually still in an unconscious position as we are defining it, and you are equating love with need satisfaction. And you know what? That's okay too, because that's where you are in your process, and that is information that is worth investigating. So then we have to define, again, being unconscious as lacking in free will, which is to say that we are operating from this place of what I am going to call automation, just automatic response, right? Not a lot of choice there. And so when we are functioning from a place of automation, we don't recognize our own power and our own authority in our lives. And maybe that's because we weren't taught those tools. You know, we were taught that we had to accommodate everyone else, thus we believe everyone else has to accommodate us, right? And so we don't know how to assume responsibility for ourselves and in our own lives, particularly not without succumbing to survival fears, which of course are at the basis of all insecure attachment styles. And so we might describe the unconscious thought to be something like, I can't be happy unless you do what makes me happy. And if you cannot do what's going to make me happy, then I can't love you. And if you can't fulfill my needs, then I have no use for you. And thus you are not lovable to me. And this is kind of like when someone says, well, if I can't have all of you, then I'll have none of you. I have enough friends. Okay. Or similarly, you might have a different type of construct, which is essentially the same premise, and that is, I cannot be happy unless you make me happy, and if only I could make myself good enough, then perhaps I can inspire you to become more of what I would have you be. And if you are not succeeding in what I would have you be, then I must have failed in loving you in some fashion. I must be deficient in some way because you have this power over me, so why don't I have this power over you? Thus, I'm going to stay with you no matter what to prove my unconditional love, prove to myself and to everyone else that I am enlightened, because only then will I become worthy. And then I will finally know my worth when you finally change. And so this is, in essence, I hope you notice, a form of bondage. And it's also an ego attachment that is tied up in what I call the biological attachment. Okay. So for example, this is a perfectly reasonable biological attachment need, which then extends into an ego attachment conscious, but we're going to say the ego in relationship to consciousness. Okay, so a conscious romantic desire. I would add here before I say this, that the ego is not independent of consciousness, that the ego and consciousness are always in relationship to one another, and they need to have a good working relationship because otherwise you fracture into psychosis. Okay, so we're not getting rid of the ego. We're just loosening it up a little bit. Remember, we're just creating a channel wide enough to let the water flow so that it doesn't flood everything. Now, the ego is actually that channel. Okay, the ego is the thing that allows things to flow more fluidly or more rigidly. And ideally, we want it to be much more fluid. So again, here's an example of a perfectly reasonable attachment need, which we might call a conscious expression of a romantic desire. I would like to meet a partner who enjoys spending time with me, respects me, who likes to share their ideas with me, our values are compatible, and the sex is amazing. Okay, perfectly reasonable need. Now, an unreasonable example of an unconscious, rigid, ego-based attachment, which may have evolved from that kind of insecure biological attachment experience, right? Bodily experience. I can only be with this person. This person is the one, I just know it, and if I can't make it work with them, I can't make it work with anybody. And once they leave me, they're just going to marry the next person anyway, so I better make this work or I'm going to die alone, or I'm never going to meet anybody else that makes me feel this way. Okay. So I want you to notice that the conscious statement is really an expression of the essence of what one would desire. reasonably and understandably. And it also happens to be a perspective that stems from this underlying premise that the world is full of an abundant opportunity for love and happiness and potential partners that could meet your needs. Okay, that could meet your very reasonable and understandable needs in a pleasurable way. These are pleasurable, healthy attachment needs. Okay, and you understand that long-term relationships are successful when there are compatible values and adequate reciprocation of need satisfaction. Notice that's separate from love. Okay, that's separate from love. Love can evolve out of those things. Love can be present before those things even exist. Love might even be the glue that allows you to negotiate whether or not those things can be met in a relationship adequately enough that you don't feel like you're abandoning yourself. Okay, compromise is not a dirty word so long as it doesn't take you past that brink of self-abandonment. Okay. Now, the unconscious statement, which we just suggested, is really subject to conditions. The conditions of the relationship, the conditions of their partner's feelings, the conditions of their fear-based perspective on the scarcity of love in the world and what is possible for them when it comes to romantic love. Okay. So the question is not, is it healthier for me to stay or to go? Because remember when we said, well, I'm gonna stay because then I will prove my unconditional love and thus I am in the higher moral ground, right? And that makes me a good person, right? Or I'm gonna leave because otherwise that means I'm in a toxic, unhealthy relationship, and if I stay with you, then I'm going to be unhealthy, right? So it's not actually a matter of do you stay or do you go? It's the vibe that you carry in either circumstance. Okay, so again, the question is not, is it healthier for me to stay or to go, but rather, can I hold my sense of self-sovereignty and maintain a loving regard for both myself and my partner as we explore this contrast created by the differences in each of our, let's call it, evolving investigations into this lifetime, whether or not I decide to stay or go. Okay, here's another one for you. Can I release this idea that potential must be realized in order to be conscious, because unfulfilled potential is as valid as any experience, and all experiences are worthy of investigation, and they all inform our collective consciousness anyway. And can I trust that if my life's process and investigations invite me to explore my values and my need satisfaction, perhaps beyond the original contract of this relationship, that I have it within my power to either revise that contract, which would be a negotiation of need satisfaction, or dissolve it completely if it is determined it is an unresolvable incompatibility. But can you do that without needing to relinquish the love that you feel for that person, the regard that you have for that person, without turning it into a story about how poorly or how well you're loving someone? Okay? Because there is plenty of love to go around, because I am love, and no revision of the external world could detract from what I find valuable and lovable about you, or what I find valuable and lovable about me. And this does not prevent me from honoring my needs in this material world, which is a task I accomplish with wisdom and discernment, accepting that it may lead to material commitments of time and effort with other partners in the future, if it is determined that our values and needs are truly incompatible in the context of a long-term partnership. But it does not mean that the bonds of love need to be dissolved. Okay. So I wanted to just address that because I feel like that question comes up repeatedly, and each time I answer it, I feel like there's sort of a new aha moment or insight that comes through for me, and I wanted to offer that as a way to discuss that today. And also, if any of that resonates with you, I'd love to see your comments in the feed, or questions or things like that, because that helps me continue to create content like this.